What's up, Packers fans? Aaron Negler here with your Cheesehead TV talking football with my good buddy, Andy Herman. Andy, how the hell are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's been a hot second. Just a few things have happened since we talked
Just a
last. A couple things.
few little transactions on the old wire there from the green and gold. I wanted to kind of touch base with you. You just mentioned it's been a while since we spoke, so I wanted to kind of take stock here. The Packers have not done everything they're going to do, but they've done, I think, the bulk of their kind of preparation prior to the draft, and now they are undoubtedly kind of ensconced in draft prep and building their board, etc. So I think it's a good time to take a breath and kind of reassess how they've arrived, where they're at. And you got to start with Aaron Rodgers coming back. Obviously, we won't belabor it, but it is the piece that makes everything else go. Let me ask you this. Did you ever really entertain the idea of possibly Aaron Rodgers not being the quarterback in 2022?
Entertained it, absolutely, but I certainly expected it to be the case that he would be back. It just felt so different from last year. I never
Right.
really bought retirement. It just didn't feel like the right time coming off a poor game against San Francisco. It felt to me like he was either going to play for Green Bay or play for another team. I never really bought retirement. And then as he sort of continued on this crusade of praising the Packers and the organization,
Right.
and like all of his teammates having his back in a variety of different ways from during the season through the offseason to then all of a sudden being like, yep, demanding a trade. It just like the pieces never
Right.
really added up. Now, the way this offseason has gone, the way that everything's gone over the last couple of years with Rodgers, like nothing would have shocked me.
Right, like that, everything you just said, right? As far as like praising everyone and giving Matt all his kudos and saying what a good place he and Goody were
Yep.
in, absolutely would not have surprised me if the report had dropped Aaron
Yep.
Rodgers is asked to be traded to Denver. Like that wouldn't have shocked me at all. But obviously that didn't happen. He is back. The other
Yep.
kind of major piece, obviously, this offseason is the trade of Davante Adams. This one, like I said at the time, I understood it from a completely dispassionate point of view, but man, it was a gut punch. And I was a bit surprised. I really thought because Aaron was coming back, the Packers would try or everything in their power to get Davante Adams back into the fold. Sure feels and sounds, though, like Davante just reached a point where he wanted out.
Yeah, it certainly seems like the case. And I think Green Bay and Brian Gutekunst did a really nice job salvaging that period, right? If he wanted out and he wanted to go to the Raiders to get a first and second round pick, save some money, be able to spend it elsewhere, I think they did as best as could possibly be expected in that scenario. But I think you and I are, in this unique situation, right? Because you and I are clearly fans of the team. We're not going to be bashful about that. However, we also try as best we can to put on an analytical hat and be like, all right, what would we do maybe in this situation? And, what would Brian Gutekunst do and those sort of things, right? So you sort of get this dual personality at times. I remember last year with Aaron
It's
Jones.
so nice to
right?
talk to someone who understands exactly
For
what you're
sure.
talking
Like
about
for
right
Aaron
now.
Jones last year, right? I'm like, man,
Right.
paying a running back, not sure
Yeah.
I like it, but like I want Aaron Jones on this team as like a fan.
Because he's a great
I love
player.
Aaron Jones, right?
Exactly. Right.
Davante Adams, it's sort of a similar situation where I'm like, man, if I look at this from a pure GM standpoint, first and second round pick, receiver about to turn 30 or $30 million for one player, man, the money that you could spend, the players that you could potentially acquire via draft pick or maybe even another trade, like I totally get it from a GM standpoint. But holy hell, as a fan, having that guy leave the team, leave the locker room, I said it immediately. As a fan, if he's not my favorite player that I've ever like cheered for in green and gold, he's up there in the Mount Rushmore for me. Just going from like what he was first and second year to what he became as the number one receiver and how he went about his work and practice and everything. There's that. As far as like interview, like in being in the room interviewing the guy, there's nobody better. There's nobody I'd rather watch tape of that I've ever watched tape on than watching Davante Adams just murder corners at the line of scrimmage.
Right.
Like, I don't care what hat I'm wearing. Davante Adams is like my guy. So it is crushing and in a million different ways. But at the same token, I certainly understand it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And it's interesting. You bring up the idea that, of course, by moving him, you do create a lot of space in a lot of different areas, whether it's draft capital, which we'll get to in a second, or the cap space, which they desperately needed. And now they go about their business bringing back guys like Devondre Campbell and Rasul Douglas. And it's kind of interesting to see. And now the addition of Jerron Reed, that defense, man, if they can pick up where they left off, and there's no guarantee, obviously, we know how kind of fickle and week to week the league can be. But man, if they can just use that as their baseline, and of course they won't be going against Jimmy G every week. I understand all this, but man, the ability to return almost all your starters and kind of build on what you did in 2021 on the defensive side of the ball. Joe Barry, I mean, who knows who they add in the draft, and the free agency's not done yet.
Yeah.
They could really become a formidable unit given what they've been able to do this offseason.
They really could. And, as you mentioned with the draft, like I hate to maybe spoil some Packer fan fantasies, but those 4 top 60 picks, some of those are going to be used on defense. Maybe it's one, maybe it's more, but at least some of those are going to be used on defense too. And I look at this defense, and going back to when Aaron Rodgers first became like, okay, Aaron freaking Rodgers. Like I always said, the best way to me to build a team like that, give me as close to a top 5, top 10 defense as I can possibly get. And I'm okay with Aaron Rodgers doing the heavy lifting on the other side of the field, especially when you pair that now with a Matt LaFleur and a system that I really think works, a better offensive line than I think we saw a season ago once Bakhtiari and hopefully Elton Jenkins return healthy, a dual running back group of Dillon and Jones, which we know what they're capable of. To me, that group, even if the receiver position doesn't get solved the ideal way that we maybe would want it to, I'm okay with Rodgers and LaFleur doing the heavy lifting on that side of the ball. If you can give me close to a top 5, top 8 defense, and I don't think it's hyperbole to say that this defense has the ability to become that with the players that they have in the secondary, Devondre Campbell returning, Rashawn Gary becoming an absolute freak. Like, I really like the way that this defense is set up. And if they can come close to that, again, they're going to have a really great opportunity with a formidable quarterback and a formidable defense and hopefully an improved special teams. How could you not be? That's what I'm here for.
You had to mention it. You had to mention it. I was saving it, but you had to mention the special teams. We'll get there too. But I want to touch on something you did just kind of mention as far as, you look at the offense, and I do wonder how much of the last 2 years with the eventual Super Bowl champions being the Rams and the Bucks and the talent they acquired at the wide receiver spot and watching how those two teams won championships are kind of coloring people's perception of what the wide receiver group has to be. And I understand the history. I understand the idea that the Packers have gone from that SI cover with all those weapons for Aaron to they've got Davante and quote no one else, which I know is completely ridiculous, but like that is the perception. And I do wonder how much of like the recent success of the latest champions are kind of coloring that, because you can win in a lot of different ways in the NFL. And to your point, you look at the group they have in offense. Yeah, do they need to add a piece or two to the wide receiver group? Yeah. But I'm telling you what, without Davante in there, it opens everything else up and becomes a less wide receiver centric offense. I actually contend and think it will be a good thing for nothing else other than Aaron Rodgers. Whether you're running the ball more, whether you're forcing him to spread it around, I think these are all good things for a quarterback on the back 9 of his career. Asking him to do less on first and second, and then, putting on the cape for third down is how I think the Packers should want to live.
I would make a strong argument over the last 3 seasons. Aaron Rodgers looks his best when he's running the fully functioning Matt LaFleur offense. It's when it devolves the wrong word, but you know what I mean, into ISO football with Davante Adams, when it devolves into 11 personnel and Rodgers doing a bunch of checks at the line of scrimmage. There's no doubt that stuff works at different times, but I really feel like when this offense is fully functioning, it's spreading the ball around and running Matt LaFleur's system. And you brought up the Bucks and the Rams as well. And I know this is a point that you and I have both sort of been hitting home, that, it's going to be a couple minutes before the Packers play their first regular season game, but also not only that, Antonio Brown was acquired mid-season by the Buccaneers. Right. Odell Beckham was acquired mid-season by the Rams. Like, we've seen Emmanuel Sanders for the 49ers when they made a push. They didn't get to or win a Super Bowl, but Emmanuel Sanders acquired mid-season for that team. Like, this is, as Brian Gutekunst has said ad nauseum, this is a 365-day-a-year process. They certainly don't play until September. And even after that, they have the ability to acquire players, especially at that position. There's usually a couple wide receivers almost every year that are acquired around the trade deadline. Even if they don't have it week 1, this is going to be a good enough team. They're going to win the North. Like, they are going to win the North unless something catastrophic happens. They can wait a little bit into the season and say, okay, maybe we'll acquire a wide receiver after we kind of see how this offense is functioning.
Totally agree. And that is the absolute point that needs to be made, I think, every time this kind of part of the offseason rolls around, because you do kind of look at what they've done, first blush, etc., and then you look around the rest of the league, and so many other teams make so many headlines, and the Packers, obviously, the last couple off seasons have been a little different, but like are traditionally very slow playing and let the market settle, etc. I think time has proven that they absolutely know what they're doing when it comes to talent acquisition, roster building, etc. I do wonder, though, and I'd love to get your take on this, because we went through a decade plus of Ted and obviously kept knocking on the door, never could get over that hump to get back to the Super Bowl. And now you've got this stretch with Brian where I would contend he's been a little bit more active in free agency, a little bit more active as far as the churn of the roster, especially the bottom part of it. But for whatever reason, still not able to kind of make that final push, hump, whatever. Now, I know you can point to injuries, David Bakhtiari being out for both the playoff runs, probably undoubtedly changes the fortunes, etc. But it's like, I can't point at any single thing where if they just make that move, and it's not like they haven't tried, like they were in on OBJ. Like there's not, for like Brian's part of it, I really struggle when I hear fans say, "Oh, they don't want to win," or they don't want they're satisfied with winning regular season games, but they don't care about championships. Because it kind of blows my mind. Because I kind of just step back and go, "Okay, let's look at this kind of dispassionately and objectively, and what more could he do?" Because I think like I said, he's been definitely more active than Ted, and I just think because he's not like them picks like the Rams are. Like people are ready to call him a failure. And I think I see anything but that.
I think one of the frustrating things that has to be as a GM is you can put together a near perfect roster and you can end up falling short in a playoff game because the player doesn't play their best, partially due to injuries. Maybe a coach coaches a poor game. Right. Like if you look at that roster last season, if everyone was healthy, like, I don't know how you put, like, that is one of the most well put together rosters. Now, granted, they borrowed money from the future. They did a variety of different things to make that happen, but they also found guys like Dennis Kelly, Devondre Campbell, Rasul Douglas, Eric Stokes, and Josh Myers in the first and second round. Like, he did such a phenomenal job with the resources he had a season ago. But I mean, you've got an MVP quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. You've got Jones and Dillon at running back. You've got the freaking best receiver in football at wide receiver, and then still have guys like Cobb and Lazard and MVS at wide receiver. Tunyon should have been there as almost like I don't know if maybe Pro Bowl is hyperbole, but like he was setting up to be a really good tight end in that offense. Arguably the best blocking tight end in Mercedes Lewis. Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, John Runyon Jr., Billy Turner. Like, what more do you want in an offensive line? 4 like edge rushers: Za'Darius, Preston, Whitney Merciless, Rashawn Gary, Kenny Clark. Dean Lowry played some of his better football towards the end of the last season. TJ Slayton became a contributor. We can go on, like the cornerback group: Jair, Rasul Douglas, like that the cornerback group that everyone is freaking out about coming up this season, with Eric Stokes, Savage, and Amos. Yes, special teams had some holes, but like as you're putting together a roster and a starting group, man, I challenge you to try to find a better 53 that's been put together, especially from a starting standpoint over the course of the last handful of seasons. It just didn't work out for them. And to get to a Super Bowl, to me, that's not all on Brian. Are there things he probably could have done a little bit better? Maybe, but man, you are picking nits at that point.
I very much agree in that regard. All right, like you brought it up. Let's talk special teams. Bisaccia obviously comes on board, is the big hire. Everyone raves about the guy as far as his leadership ability, including Matt LaFleur down there at the league meetings earlier this week. But I know they've brought on Nixon, the former Raider, to obviously you got to think Bisaccia had a hand in that.
Yep.
But I'd love to get your opinion on this kind of aspect of it. Do you think we'll see much of a change? Because they haven't arrived at that point of the offseason yet, as far as they haven't even reported, obviously, for offseason activities yet. They've got to go through the draft, etc. Do you think Brian and company change much of their MO when it comes to roster selection, when it comes down to it, say, late training camp, and it's time to make those decisions as far as who we're keeping on the roster, who we're letting go, who we're trying to bring back on the practice squad? Or do we think that it's going to be business as usual? Because obviously, as we've been talking about, they have won a boatload of football games. They clearly know what they're doing when it comes to putting together their roster. There's not making any bones about that. But in a year where you're coming off a playoff loss that you can directly attribute to your atrocious special teams, and it has been an ongoing issue for over a decade within your franchise, Do you think that makes Brian, gives him any pause whatsoever when it comes to who am I keeping for these bottom 5, 6 spots? Does he finally maybe acquiesce to special teams a little bit more?
I think he has to, right? If you look over the last few seasons, there's been a couple of roster spots that have basically been given to redshirt players, right?
Right.
Tim Boyle and Alex Light were a great example a few years ago.
Alex Light, what a pull.
I know. Yash Nyman, to be fair, was one of those players who got basically 2 years of redshirt. Vernon Scott last year is such a weird one to me because even when they brought in a Sean Davis later in the season, Davis would get active and Vernon Scott
was up,
would be inactive, right? So but they kept him on the roster. Like they've gone through this phase where they've basically redshirted one or two guys almost every season for about 3 or 4 seasons now. I just think that you're at the point when you are legitimately all in that you don't have those spots for those type of players. If you can add a special teams ace near a vet minimum deal towards the end of your roster that can make a legitimate impact on special teams, like if Vernon Scott was maybe even playing on special teams, like, okay, I can maybe understand it.
You can make the case for it, right?
He's not, right? He's literally just a red shirt because you think he might turn into a solid safety down the line. And listen, a year or two from now, maybe that Vernon Scott move pays off. Maybe he's playing that nickel linebacker position or safety and he looks great. And you're like, man, good thing they kept him on a red shirt. But maybe it's another Alex Light or, whomever. So I just think they have to, with the approach that they've taken to this roster, borrowing so much from the future, the red shirt guy that you're keeping, I don't care what he does 2-3 years from now. You're just
right, because Aaron's most likely gone, and then you're a hard reset.
You can figure that stuff out later. It's time to win now, and that includes filling those last couple spots with special teams players.
Could not agree more. Andy, it's always great to catch up with you and talk some ball and talk Packers. Make sure you're checking Andy's stuff out. Pack a Day Podcast, Packer Report, Packer everywhere, everything, all the time online. Andy Herman, thank you so much for joining me, man.
Appreciate it, man. Anytime.